Welcome to the Global WarWatch Network. We're the place where we really try to dig deep into complex global events, pulling out the key insights, the things you really need to stay properly informed.
That's right. And today, we're taking one of those deep dives into something truly multifaceted, the foreign involvement in Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of different sources here looking at, the shifting dynamics of aid, industry, international relations, all of it.
And our goal, really, for you listening, is to help navigate all these intricate details, give you a clear picture of who's doing what, and critically, how it's actually impacting the conflict.
Exactly, and maybe uncover some surprising facts from the data along the way. So let's get into it. Let's unpack these crucial foreign elements shaping the war.
Well, the first thing that just jumps out is the sheer scale of international assistance to Ukraine. It's genuinely striking, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just aid. It feels more like a global lifeline. It's fundamentally shifted things.
Definitely. And the U.S. commitment alone is, staggering. You mentioned over $112 billion approved by Congress back in 2022.
Yeah, and that didn't stop there. The Biden administration asked for another, what was it, $61.4 billion in October 23.
Mm.
And then that huge $95 billion package in April 24, the one that also included Israel and Taiwan support.
And it's not just big lump sums, is it? It's been flowing pretty consistently through these drawdown packages.
Exactly. Hundreds of millions here, a billion or two there, almost monthly sometimes. It seems quite agile, responding to needs on the ground.
A steady supply of critical kit.
Hmm.
But it's definitely not just the U.S., is it? European nations have really stepped up, too.
No, far from it. You've got Latvia, for instance. April 2024, they approved about 9.6 million, some for reconstruction, some for the European Peace Facility.
And the UK's contribution has been pretty substantial from early on. By August 2022, they'd already put in £2.3 billion. That's about $2.8 billion in military aid.
Right, and that included some really key stuff, didn't it? M270 MLRS.
Yeah, those multi-launch rocket systems. Vital for hitting targets deep behind the lines. And 5,000 NLAW anti-tank missiles.
Yeah, NLAWs, Brimstone missiles too, 120 armored vehicles like the Mastiff, even heavy lift drones, a real mix.
Germany's role has also grown. They added another $1.1 billion package in October 23. And crucially, that included a Patriot air defense system.
Hugely important, those Patriots, for protecting cities from missile attacks. And Denmark, more recently, committed over $30 million just for artillery ammo, didn't they? Delivery expected soon.
Yeah, that ammo is always a critical need. But beyond the money, it's the specific kit and the training that really make a difference, I think.
Like those combat drones from Taiwan.
Yeah.
800 of them via Poland back in September 22.
Exactly. And the UK donating those 3 Sea King helicopters, ex-Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, that adds real capability.
And then the move towards heavier Western gear. The Netherlands offering F-16s and Leopard 2 tanks.
Right, though that was conditional on agreements, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Still, a significant signal.
And the U.S. pledging the M1 Abrams tanks, 31 of them, plus the M88 recovery vehicles. That was January 23. A big package, even if they took months to actually arrive.
Powerful stuff. But the training is just as vital, maybe more so. You can't just hand over complex kit.
Absolutely. The EU doubling its training goal to 30,000 Ukrainian troops by early 23. That's a huge undertaking.
With support from so many countries, France, Poland, Canada, the Baltics, Slovakia, Germany, UK, US. It's a real coalition effort.
Plus, you had the U.S. Lend-Lease for Ukraine kick in around October 22, streamlining the whole process, and talk of systematizing it under EUCOM.
Yeah, making it more efficient. But, this brings us to a really critical point, the timing of all this aid, the delays.
Right. This is fascinating and quite worrying. The Institute for the Study of War, ISW, they made an assessment on this, didn't they?
They did. They argued the need for Western supplies was clear way back in June 2022. If commitments were made then.
Ukraine could potentially have had the gear deployed by November, December 22, just as they were having success in Kharkiv and Kherson.
Exactly. But instead, the key tanks, like the Abrams and Leopards, weren't really committed until January 23, after those counteroffensives had, culminated.
So the argument is this delay meant Ukraine couldn't fully exploit Russia's disorganization because they were short on kit and couldn't rely on replacements arriving quickly.
Precisely. They had to conserve what they had, mainly older Soviet stuff. And ISW suggests this allowed Russia time to dig in, reorganize, reinforce, potentially prolonging the war quite significantly.
That's a sobering thought. And more recently, there's data suggesting the U.S. aid suspension really hurt Ukraine's air defenses.
Yes, particularly against long-range Russian strikes, like ballistic missiles. It highlights how dependent they still are and how damaging these pauses in aid can be. It really shapes the day-to-day reality on the battlefield.
It absolutely does. These aren't just abstract political decisions, they have immediate, tangible consequences. But okay, amidst all this reliance on external help, there's another story unfolding, isn't there? Ukraine's own defense industry.
Ah, yes, that's a really remarkable transformation. You have to remember the history. Before '91, Ukrainian arms factories were just part of the Soviet system, often doing components, with final assembly mostly in Russia.
And after the Cold War, the industry really declined, didn't it? Economic problems, disarmament treaties, down to only about 260-odd enterprises by '93.
A massive drop. So to see the surge now, it's quite something. While foreign aid is still crucial, their domestic production is booming.
That main state company, Ukrainian Defense Industry, used to be Ukroboronprom, saw revenues jump 69% in 2023 to $2.2 billion.
Yeah, the fastest growth ever. And it's not just the big state firm. Loads of smaller private producers are popping up. Lots of joint ventures with foreign companies, too. It's becoming much more dynamic.
And they actually tripled overall weapons production in 2023. That's incredible under wartime conditions.
It really is. They're churning out more 155-millimeter shells, 120-millimeter mortars, those Bogdana self-propelled guns, various armored vehicles.
Even developing new things like hybrid air defense systems, laser-guided rockets. It shows real innovation under pressure.
And they're smartly leveraging international partnerships for production, not just receiving finished goods. U.S. and Ukrainian firms looking at making 155-millimeter ammo together.
Yeah, that's a critical bottleneck, isn't it? Ammunition.
Absolutely. And you've got German arms giant Rheinmetall planning a big jump in shell production, 350,000 in 2025. Way more than planned. They're investing heavily.
Even companies in places like the Czech Republic PBS Group making jet engines, production up 220%, partly due to Ukrainian demand.
It all points towards this drive for greater self-sufficiency. And that raises a big question, doesn't it, for you, the listener, thinking long-term. How does this shift towards domestic capability potentially create a more stable future for Ukraine and maybe for European security more broadly?
That is the strategic question, isn't it? If they can sustain this, it changes the game long-term. Okay, so that's Ukraine building its strength. Let's pivot now and look at the other side. Russia's war effort, its foundations, its challenges, its allies.
Right. And when you look at the cost for Russia, particularly the human cost, it's quite stark. NATO sources, as of June 2025, were estimating average daily casualties at around 11,140 personnel.
1,140 per day, with nearly 975 of those killed in action. Those are huge numbers.
Immense losses. And despite that, their territorial gains have been, frankly, marginal. The Economist calculated that during the May-June 25 offensive push, they were taking maybe 15 square kilometers a day.
Which led to that calculation, what was it? It would take them 89 years to seize all of Ukraine at that rate?
Something like that, yeah. And their vehicle losses are just unsustainable. Nearly 9,000 armored vehicles and tanks lost annually in 2024, according to some reports. That's far more than they can seemingly produce or repair.
Yet they are adapting, aren't they? Tactically, drone production, for example, seems to have ramped up significantly.
Massively. Producing something like 60 JRN drones, those Shahed-type drones per day between February and April 2025. They're using centers like Rubicon for unmanned tech.
And that weird tactic of using motorcycles in assaults to try and dodge Ukrainian drones.
Yeah, a sort of low-tech adaptation to a high-tech threat. Shows they're trying things. But the economic picture for Russia looks increasingly strained.
Definitely. A $34 billion budget deficit back in 2022. Their national wealth fund being drained to pay for the war, maybe $8–9 billion a month. There were projections it could run out of liquid funds by the end of 23.
And you had Oleg Deripaska, the oligarch, warning back in March 23 that Russia could literally run out of money by 2024. That's quite a statement.
Putin himself admitting inflation was over 9%, though many think it's, well, probably closer to 20% in reality. Plus severe labor shortages hitting the economy.
And their sovereign wealth fund has tanked, hasn't it? From maybe $150 billion down to around $38 billion. Plus losing the gas transit fees through Ukraine from January 25. Another potential $6 billion hit for Gazprom annually.
It all adds up. But critically, Russia isn't fighting this alone. They have partners. China, for one.
Yeah, China's role is really significant, helping Russia dodge sanctions, supplying dual-use tech, those crucial microelectronics for missiles and drones.
Which has led to U.S. sanctions on, what, dozens of Chinese companies now? 42 in late 23, another 20 in May 24.
Trying to curb that flow. Then you've got North Korea. This is quite extraordinary reports of potentially thousands of North Korean troops deployed to Russia's Kursk Oblast.
Troops actually involved in fighting. Some sources claim they're doing infantry assaults.
That's the claim, though details are murky. And the suspected quid pro quo is Russia providing missile and drone tech to North Korea, which might explain why those North Korean missiles Russia's using seem to be getting more accurate.
A very worrying development. And Iran, of course, has been a major supplier of drones from the start.
Absolutely. Huge numbers of Shahed drones exported, plus helping Russia set up its own Shahed production lines domestically.
Belarus remains tightly integrated, too, through the Union State. Lukashenko asking for, and apparently getting Putin's agreement for, Oreshnik ballistic missiles to be deployed there by mid-2025.
Deepening military ties there. Interestingly, though, India seems to be trying to sort of hedge its bets.
Yeah, reports suggest they're trying to reduce reliance on Russian arms, cutting orders, increasing work with Western firms, even while maintaining those important economic links.
It's a complex picture, isn't it? A shifting pattern of alliances and dependencies.
Okay.
So let's move on to the diplomatic front, or perhaps the lack of one. The peace proposals versus Putin's demands.
Right. There have been proposals from the Ukrainian and U.S. side. Zelensky repeated in April 25 that Ukraine was ready for a full ceasefire, minimum 30 days.
There was that joint U.S.-Ukrainian 30-day proposal back in March 25, and even talk of a sort of temporary ceasefire in the sky, stopping the missile and drone strikes on energy infrastructure.
And that more detailed U.S. proposal from April 25, that one laid out some quite specific terms, didn't it?
It did. Things like de jure recognition of Crimea as Russian, de facto acceptance of the current occupation lines in the east and south.
Ukraine not joining NATO, but potentially the EU.
Right.
The nuclear plant under U.S. operation, but recognized as Ukrainian territory. Lifting sanctions since 2014, compensation for Ukraine. It was quite comprehensive.
But Russia's response, or lack thereof, and Putin's stated position, well, it shows just how wide the gap is. He rejects a full ceasefire unless it addresses the initial causes, his framing, and leads to long-term peace. No time frame commitment.
And the core demands remain the same, don't they? Ukraine's neutrality, demilitarization, denazification.
Which essentially means regime change and stripping Ukraine of its ability to defend itself. Plus, demanding Ukraine cede all 4 annexed oblasts, even the parts Russia doesn't control.
And floating ideas about Kharkiv and Sumy as buffer zones, calling Odessa a Russian city. It's an expansive list of demands.
And then there's the rhetoric. Putin calling Zelensky illegitimate because elections couldn't be held under martial law, even though the Ukrainian constitution forbids it.
Weaponizing things like the Black Sea grain deal, demanding sanctions relief for banks as a precondition for even discussing a ceasefire extension.
And using figures like Dmitry Medvedev to just amplify this really inflammatory language, trying to paint Western aid as pointless, pushing this narrative to sow doubt and division.
It's a concerted information strategy, isn't it? Trying to undermine NATO unity, drive wedges between the U.S. and Europe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Constantly invoking the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War mythos, to justify the invasion domestically, portraying it as fighting Nazism again.
And we saw them testing their sovereign internet system again in May 25. That capability to potentially cut off regions internally, control the information flow, it's quite chilling.
Very much so. And alongside that, the ongoing systematic Russification of Ukrainian children in occupied territories, forced deportations, changing curricula.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to erase Ukrainian identity and legitimize Russian control long-term. A truly awful aspect of this war.
It really is. And that brings us to the wider human and systemic impacts beyond just the battlefield tactics and diplomacy. The cost to civilians is just devastating.
The latest UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission report, covering December 24 to May 25, it documented nearly 1,000 civilian deaths, 968, and almost 5,000 injuries.
And that was a 37% increase compared to the previous year. How is that happening?
Well, the report points to increased use of explosives in populated areas, but also these short-range combat drones being used more frequently in civilian areas. And worryingly, Russia adapting tactics to specifically maximize civilian harm.
How so?
Things like using cluster munitions designed with delayed fuses so they injure people later, and the horrific double-tap strikes where they hit a location, wait for first responders to arrive, and then hit it again.
That's barbaric. And the situation for prisoners of war, the UN report had findings there too.
Deeply disturbing ones. Credible allegations of 106 Ukrainian POWs executed by Russian forces since the full-scale invasion began, with maybe 35 of those in that recent reporting period alone.
Executions and confirmation of widespread systematic torture of Ukrainian POWs in Russian custody.
Yes, the UN confirmed those practices, clear violations of international humanitarian law.
And on the other side,
The UN verified one instance of a Russian soldier being executed by Ukrainian forces since February 22. It noted most alleged ill treatment by the Ukrainian side seemed to happen during transit, not in official internment facilities. But Russia, of course, often tries to weaponize POW exchanges to spread disinformation about Ukraine.
another layer to the information war. And what about foreign fighters or personnel? We hear reports about Western special forces.
Yes, reports suggesting maybe up to 50 UK Special Forces personnel present in Ukraine this year. U.S. officials apparently reviewing intelligence sharing. It's sensitive, murky territory.
And the U.S. potentially allowing American contractors in, but strictly for maintenance, not combat roles.
That seems to be the direction of travel, helping maintain the complex Western equipment provided.
And on the Russian side, reports of Chinese nationals fighting.
Yeah, maybe 100, 200 Chinese citizens fighting as mercenaries for Russia.
Yeah.
Ukrainian intelligence claims to have identified at least 155. It adds another strange dimension to the conflict's makeup.
It really does. And, if you step back and look at that bigger picture, Russia deepening its ties with China, North Korea, Iran, countries often seen as adversaries by the West.
It really underscores a shift, doesn't it? A changing geopolitical landscape. It suggests a growing need, from a Western perspective, to really strengthen alliances and partnerships to counterbalance that emerging alignment.
Absolutely. So as we've seen, this conflict is so much more than just Russia versus Ukraine. It's this incredibly complex web international support, economic warfare, shifting alliances, domestic industrial efforts, brutal human costs, and intense information battles.
It touches almost every aspect of international relations.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, our listener. Given everything we've unpacked today, these profound dynamics of aid, industry, alliances, and the sheer cost of this war, what long-term shifts in global power structures and maybe even military strategy do you think are being set in motion right now? What might the world stage look like in 10, 20 years as a result of what's happening today?
That's a really big question, and definitely something worth pondering long after this deep dive ends. A lot to think about there.
Indeed. Well, this has been a deep dive from the Global WarWatch Network. If you found this discussion insightful, please do like, share, and subscribe to the Global WarWatch Network.
We genuinely love to hear your thoughts on today's topic, especially that final question. Let us know in the comment section below.
And you can join the conversation on our social media channels, too. All the links you need are right there in the description. Thanks for tuning in.